This week on The Communicators, a discussion on a proposal by the FCC for an emergency communications network. Joining us are Dick Mirgon of the Association for Public Safety Communications Officials and Ed Thomas, former FCC Chief Engineer.
This week on The Communicators, a discussion of public safety and sale of the spectrum, and whether or not part of the spectrum should be dedicated to emergency communications. Joining us, Ed Thomas, former Chief Engineer for the FCC, and Dick Mirgon, who is currently the President of the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials. Also joining us is Howard Buskirk, Associate Managing Editor of Communications Daily, to join in the questioning. Mr. Thomas, if we could start with you, there's a lot of discussion and activity on the sale of the D block portion of the spectrum and whether that should be dedicated to public safety and emergency communications. Do you believe that it should be?
Dedicated on a full-time basis, no. And let me explain why. The nature of public safety communications is that quite often, in fact most of the time, it's lightly used. And then, God forbid, when there's an emergency, you need a lot of spectrum. And it's intensely used during a... So the issue becomes, how do you provide at a particular time and place the amount of spectrum needed in times of an emergency?
9/11, for example.
9/11, Katrina, any other, God forbid, emergencies in the future. It seems to me the FCC plan deals with that in a very simple way.
From the National Broadband Plan.
From the National Broadband Plan.
How does it deal with it?
It deals with it by allowing what I've been calling preemption. And it's the way the plan defines it is a bit ambiguous. So let me speak for myself. I believe preemption is the proper word. And by that I mean, given that an emergency occurs at a particular time and place, the public safety organization, through some agreed upon administrative procedures, should have the right to preempt the D block and other spectrum in order to get the amount of spectrum they need. And when I say preempt it, I mean if the spectrum is congested, commercial users get dropped and bandwidth gets allocated to public safety. That way, you take care of the emergency when there's heavy use required, and when there's light use required, the 10 megahertz, in my judgment, is more than sufficient. That already is assigned for broadband. One other issue, I understand the FCC is also considering that another 10 megahertz, which is presently assigned for narrowband, its assignment may in fact be changed, if they haven't done that already, to allow public safety the option to either use it for narrowband or broadband.
Dick Mirgon, your organization, from a recent report by your organization, the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials, this is what you have to say. The Commission, the FCC, greatly underestimates the current and future capacity needs of public safety when it assumes that 10 megahertz of broadband spectrum is adequate for mission-critical high-speed data.
Correct. When the Commission looked at the current use of spectrum by public safety and nationally, they did a lot of averaging. The problem we have with it is that we're not an average. A patrol car is an office. These are people with full laptops in their cars, a lot of technology, license plate readers, facial recognition coming online. We've got fire departments which have got full laptops in the car. These are not handheld devices. And what the FCC did was look at handheld device usage. Well, you start talking about video cameras in buildings to see where suspects are, to see where fire is burning. The ability to see a hazmat spill without sending somebody in. That consumes a lot of bandwidth. We don't believe that that was taken into consideration. There's nothing in the report that indicates that. And part of our argument is that the Commission has stated that they believe 10 megahertz is enough today and that we may need more in the future. Well, our issue is we don't plan for today. We plan for the future. I've built wireless networks, wired networks, and you don't build one based on what you need today. You build one based on your forecast for 10 to 15 years. And the other issue that plays into this is once that spectrum is gone, then you don't have any other spectrum to bring in. And we believe that that needs to be in large part dedicated spectrum. We also agree that there will be times that we will have excess spectrum and that we should be authorized to have agreements with carriers for them to be able to use that excess spectrum so it doesn't end up idle. I mean, it is a different day and age in communications. But when that disaster happens, whether it's New York City, you don't have time to spend an hour, 2 hours going through some process with a carrier to get preemption. You need it now. So if we manage, control, own the spectrum, it's a much easier process to execute. But yet we agree that at times in low usage, 3 o'clock in the morning, whatever, that there be latitude to bring in commercial users or other applications to use that spectrum to create more efficiency.
So kind of a reverse preemption, as Mr. Thomas described it. Is that a fair way of saying it?
We're not arguing against partnerships. We support partnerships. What we're arguing is we need to control the spectrum to ensure that, and that we be authorized to engage with carriers to help share that spectrum on an RFP basis or other type of process to ensure that there isn't that waste going on, but that we have the spectrum, we can control it, use it when we need to.
Any response to that, Mr. Thomas?
At the risk of bordering the audience, let me give a few statistics. Right now, public safety has 100 megahertz below 4 gigahertz. And they have 50, no, I beg your pardon, let me restate that. They have 100 megahertz total. They have 50 below 4 gigahertz and about 27 below 700. Okay? They use a system called LMR, Land Mobile Radio. The FCC plan calls for LTE. LTE is 16 times more efficient than LMR. So 10 megahertz is worth 160 megahertz, number one. Number two, the interesting thing is if you want to increase bandwidth using a cellular system, you have to put the cell sites very close together. That increases the cost. And if you look at plans like the Motorola plan, it's about 3 to 4 times more expensive to build than the FCC plan with no preemption, because you're going to need 3 or 4 more times cell sites. So at the end of the day, I will agree with you, you cannot afford to wait a couple of hours in times of an emergency. But there's a lot of ways to do this where it could be near instantaneous if the procedures are in place beforehand. And basically, you get all you need. Well, just one last point. My suggestion, whether it's in the plan or not, is in a time of emergency, public safety should be able to preempt everything they need. So it might be 50 megahertz or 100 megahertz within that particular geographic location where the emergency occurs.
And just 2 counterpoints, if I may, is that I don't think the argument of 100 megahertz is fair, because out of that 50 is in 4.9, which is so high in the spectrum that it's very difficult to use. I mean, it doesn't do building penetration.
I agree.
So it's really kind of not relevant to the discussion. The other 50, a lot of that's on narrowband push-to-talk, and most of it's scattered throughout the other spectrum. In VHF, UHF, you can't aggregate it. So when you look at what we have for broadband, we're just at that 10. The other issue, which just escaped my aging mind here, is that the carriers have not endorsed or supported the idea of ruthless preemption. As a matter of fact, they've made statements that they're absolutely against it because of having their customers drop suddenly. And that's become a very dynamic topic in trying to talk to people about it, is that they operate to make money. And the thought of dropping carriers or customers by the carriers is not necessarily palatable. And in many years when we've talked about preemption with the carriers, because we've had this discussion for 20 years, I mean, of the 30 I've been in the business, and they've said, no, we're not going to give public safety preemption, what we would refer to as ruthless preemption, because what about that person that's making a 911 call? Or what about that person who's a doctor talking to a patient? And they feel that there's not only a liability there, but a public perception exposure. So as much as, I agree that the carriers should be doing that, that has not been a successful discussion and I think we've had to move on that.
Howard Buskirk, next question.
One thing I wanted to ask about is there's kind of an extraordinary situation that's developed, which is in that at this point there seems to be a very deep divide between the FCC and many in the public safety community in terms of the best course for public safety communications. The FCC, or the public safety wants many elements of that want the D block, and the FCC calls in its national broadband plan to sell the D block to commercial carriers and find another mechanism for providing public safety communications. Are you concerned at this point about what seems to be the deep divide between the FCC and folks from your organization and elsewhere in the public safety community?
Absolutely not. I think the phrase you just used was very appropriate. There seems to be a deep divide. From my perspective, it's not a deep divide. I mean, we've had this discussion with the Commission many times that they don't control the spectrum, that they've got laws and rules they have to follow from Congress on the auction. And granted, we have had a very spirited debate on that broadband plan and the D block and how all that was put together. But that is just one item in so many things public safety works with the Commission on. They've been very helpful in moving 911 location issues along. Jamie Barnett and his staff have been, very open to public safety. Chairman Janikowski, when we've asked for meetings, he's been there. So, I wouldn't want to characterize it as a deep divide because I don't feel that way. That they've got a job to do. They did what they believed was correct. We disagreed with it. We had our research, they had theirs, and we're moving through the process. And fortunately today, Chairman Rockefeller has agreed to support us on the D block, and that was a wonderful thing, and he's very supportive of public safety, and we appreciate it. Along with Senator McCain and Senator Lieberman have sponsored a bill today that's been very supportive of public safety. So I think a lot of people on the Hill do get it, that it's a matter of reallocating the spectrum to public safety. The Commission was in good faith trying to move some issues forward. And, if people are feeling that maybe there was a divide or hurt feelings, we'll get past it, because I see this as nothing but a professional discussion, and I don't think it ever got to a point to where it was, shall we say, heated.
Mr. Thomas, any response?
Well, first of all, generally speaking, even when I was at the FCC is always very supportive for public safety. So no arguments there. But if I limit your question to the issue of broadband public safety, there is a deep divide. You want to call it a spirited conversation, but there isn't agreement. Here's my fear. The divide or the disagreement or the spirited debate is overflowing to Congress as we speak. We have the Rockefeller bill, Waxman has another bill, and there'll be others. I hope this argument, for better or worse, doesn't result in something that basically makes the funding go into neutral. Because this is the last opportunity, and maybe that's an overstatement, but let me say it anyhow, to create a truly interworking public safety network nationwide. And it comes with funding. Now, the truth of the matter is, if that funding disappears, the whole thing evaporates. So if you have the neutral expert body, the FCC, fighting with public safety or strongly debating public safety about a plan, it is entirely possible at the end of the day, Congress goes into a stall and says, look, unless you guys partner and figure it out, we're not going to fund this thing. Go back to the drawing board. And that's a major concern to me, because I don't think you would argue with me. Creating an interworking nationwide network is an extremely high priority.
Agreed. And like the FCC said in their call today, we believe everybody is in agreement on the funding issue. Obviously there are budget constraints in this town, but again, everybody we've talked to wants to find funding for us. There's some hurdles to get through, but that is clearly a key point. The White House seems to have, I believe, supports that. The Commission does. We support that. So we believe we're going to work through those issues and get the funding.
Mr. Thomas, you were recently quoted as saying that the developing a plan to make an interoperable nationwide network for public safety is akin to the pursuit of the Holy Grail.
Well, it has been. And what has got me a little upset is I think we're so close. I really do. I mean, I said there's a argument between the FCC and public safety. But I really think reasonable people in a room together, and I include the carriers because I do agree with you, the carrier, and I hate the word ruthless preemption, but have constantly opposed ruthless preemption. But putting some reasonable people in a room, the FCC, the carriers, and public safety, I think something can be worked out that may not be perfect for everyone, but at least goes to allowing nationwide interoperability. It's been something that just has been elusive for, I don't know, 100 years? You name it.
Well, you know, I argue APCO was 75 years old, and we started APCO to deal with interoperability issues. So we're going to at least agree on 75.
So we do,
Yeah.
we do.
Let me ask, is it time for the FCC maybe to call the carriers in, public safety, get everybody in a room and say, we need to work, we need to figure out, we need to broker some kind of a deal here. We need to make something happen.
I agree with you, Hunter. I think they should lock the door and shove pizza under the door until people come out with an agreement. I honest to God think we're very, very close. If we made a list, and I think you would agree with me, the good things and the bad things are very small compared to the good things, but they're very important to public safety. Mm-hmm. And the real issue is to get it in there and knock those bad things down to a point at least that's acceptable to public safety, or they agree they're willing to swallow it as long as they get something. And I think the FCC is uniquely positioned to get the right people in a room, lock the door, shove pizzas under the door, and see if they can bang something out, very much like a 24-hour union negotiation. And I think we're close. I really, really do.
Well, what I was going to ask, is that something that, how do you feel about that, Dick?
You know,
is that something
public
you
safety
guys
has
would
always
want to
been
do?
open for discussion. We went down this path because, one, it was our only option, and two, we feel we need to be able to control that spectrum to ensure our use, and that some regulation isn't going to change our access to that spectrum. Now, with that said, again, we state that part of our plan, our desire, is to be able to create partnerships with the commercial carrier. So in effect, we have a shared network. It's just a difference of who holds the license. And I think that's one of the key issues, is that we're not trying to exclude the commercial carriers. We're willing to have them in the network on a secondary basis. We just need to control the license, ensure that access.
But is there any wiggle room on the D block from your standpoint? Is that something that you could possibly concede, or do people in your organization feel that's something you have to have control of?
We need to hold the license. Yes, we've made that clear from the beginning.
And just let me add this. This is Washington, D.C. Deals are made all the time, and quite often both parties to a deal go off not quite happy, but willing to swallow it. You can't do it in front of the TV cameras. You can't do it in front of the press. You can announce it. My point is it's important that those discussions be held intensely, and I think a agreement could be reached. And you can't do it individually. You need the carriers, you need those representative public safety, and you need the commission. And I think there's enough wiggle room, and I'm not trying to say whether you get the D block or not, but in the whole plan, I think there's enough wiggle room to get a deal together that everybody walks out of the room and sings Kumbaya.
Dick Mirgon, you just recently retired as Director of Technology Services for Douglas County, Nevada. That's Reno, correct?
South of Reno, correct.
South of Reno. Well, give us your perspective on the issue of interoperability and whether or not you had enough spectrum from that local perspective.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the interesting thing about Nevada is in some cases we did it worse than anybody else, and in other cases we did it better than others. And we have just got this hodgepodge of different spectrum, 800, they're building 700, 450, 150, just all over the place. And it cost a lot of money because we've got
Why
fire
are different
trucks.
systems being built? Is it because
Well, because there was no
local...
spectrum. Because what happened is when we were building on large sites, high mountain sites, we could only cover certain areas because we'd interfere with others. So we then go to 450. Well, then that gets eaten up. So people go to 800. And my argument has been, spectrum allocation to public safety historically has been like scrap food off a dinner table. Nobody's given us sufficient spectrum at one time to solve the interoperability problem. And I've referred to this as the last best hope for interoperability, that if we're allocated a proper amount of spectrum with the right rules, we have a chance of solving interoperability, because as much as great engineers design gateways, bridges, and other stuff, because I've bought them and installed them, the user in the field has got to be able to touch that device, turn a channel, and have it work. You tell him he's got to implement a gateway, they're going to go, you know, I don't have time for that. You may train me on it, but I don't have time in the middle of this. So, you know, been there, done that, and this is our best hope to solve it.
And as a former chief engineer for the FCC, you're hearing this local perspective, Mr. Thomas. What's your response?
Well, first of all, I've heard it before from many jurisdictions. The issue isn't the want of spectrum. The issue is legacy systems. LMRS is a very old system. It's kind of like you know, my apologies to Motorola, a 1940 system. You got one big tower, high tower, and you're trying to reach people within a large geographic area with all the infirmities of doing that. It doesn't have a cellular arrangement. That system is extremely limited. P25, which was an attempt at getting to interoperability at voice, has been around since when, 1980?
About 25 years.
Yeah, 25 years. And still, we're fighting to do it, and we assign things. One last thing. One thing that disturbed me when I was chief engineer, when I worked for Michael Powell, he basically had the philosophy, let's get rid of command and control, and let the market prevail, and let's minimize our service rules, with one exception, public safety. And they're overruled. By overruled, there are too many FCC rules that allow this part of the spectrum to be used this way, another part to be used the other way. So the net result is it's very, very hard to create interoperability, even though you might have the spectrum. And that spectrum is also being used right now, so you got to rip out what's already there, which makes it extremely difficult.
True, and you're absolutely correct. And, you know, we've got companies that build what they believe is the best technology, which aren't interoperable with each other, which is why prior to this, we of Public Safety has agreed that LTE will be the standard. The commission's endorsed that. They're creating ERIC. ERIC was another thing, the great thing they did for public safety, their interoperability committee, and we're getting there. And we have to have that standard technology to solve it in a piece of the puzzle. It's a big puzzle.
Howard Buskirk.
Dick, a little earlier, Ed touched on the issue of timing. Now, it looks from all appearances like there's not negotiations right now to any degree between public safety and carriers, the FCC. You know, meanwhile, we have dueling bills on the Hill. We're in the last year of Congress before what will be a pretty tough election. Are you concerned about timing right now, that all this stuff could start to fall apart? Jamie Barnett, the FCC Public Safety Bureau Chief, keeps saying we need to do this quickly because carriers are building out their LTE networks.
Yeah, we're definitely concerned about timing. I mean, but part of it is just moving the ball forward. We're public safety. You know, we're not DC. We're not used to spending 2-3 years debating something. We're used to making decisions and moving it forward. So a lot of it goes to our personalities and just how we do business. It's a matter of we recognize an issue, we see what is the reasonable solution, and we're just going to move that ball forward. And so moving it forward quickly, that's part of our personality. That's part of who we are as local government, and public safety is resolving the problem and moving on.
And I also wanted to ask you, I think one of the questions that's come up is how, what we're talking about here is a wireless broadband network, and it would give public safety the ability to do lots of different kinds of things. Is there general agreement among public safety about what they need the spectrum for, or are most of the agencies still trying to figure that out at this point?
No, I believe we are in full agreement. As we go out and talk to different entities, they have that same vision. And that's why we believe that use of that spectrum is going to grow and grow, because we're united. This is one of the first times all fire, police, EMS have all been united on a topic and a vision.
But what will they use the spectrum for? I mean,
it'll be everything from floor plans to facial recognition to license plate recognition. I mean, real-time video to assess situations, to deploy units, blue force tracking to be able to know where your resources are. one of the issues they had in the Gulf spills. They couldn't do Blue Force tracking effectively, and we need to make that part of the network. So
what is Blue Force tracking? I'm sorry.
the ability to see where your resources are in a geospatial format, to where you know that if you believe you've got a road closed, you can see that you've got a unit down there closing the road. And all that makes it for a safer America and allows us to catch the bad guys quicker and the right bad guys.
And we're going to have to end it there. Thank you for being on the Communicators. Ed Thomas, former Chief Engineer for the FCC. Dick Mirgon, who is President of the Association of Public Safety Communications Officials. Howard Buskirk, Associate Managing Editor of Communications Daily.